There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch, Michael Ryder.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff. I'm your host, Bill Cannon, retired NYPD sergeant with 27 years of service. You know, today we're talking again about the Uvalde shooting in the Robb Elementary School. And as these hearings go on, some really disturbing facts are coming out, because you got to realize investigation takes time. And all of these facts now, almost a month since the shooting, are coming out, and facts that are irrefutable, indisputable, that are not just facts that are covered by electronic verification, i.e. telephone calls, recordings, but also on-scene cameras of what actually occurred, so that the truth is slowly sifting out. And the truth, as they say, will set you free. But the truth in this case is quite disturbing. It's quite disturbing in that we're seeing things that totally go against what we were told initially in this case, in the investigation of this case. And very disturbing. I'm going to read some from the New York Times. The head of the Texas State Police on Tuesday offered an emphatic rebuke of the police response to a shooting last month at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, calling it an abject failure that ran counter to decades of training. In his comments before a special state Senate committee in Austin, Stephen McCraw, the director of the Department of Public Safety, provided the most complete public account yet of the agency's month-old investigation, and a forceful argument that officers at the scene could have and should have confronted the gunman without delay after arriving. Just minutes after a gunman began shooting children on May 24th, he said the officers at the scene had enough firepower and protective equipment to storm into the classrooms. The only thing stopping a hallway of dedicated officers from entering room 111 and 112 was the on-scene commander, Mr. McCraw said. But the commander decided to put the lives of officers ahead of the lives of children, he said, delaying the confrontation with the gunman for more than an hour while he waited for a key that was never needed. Most of the victims appear to have been shot in the gunman's first few minutes in the classroom. But Mr. McCraw's testimony addressed a central and painful question that still hung over the massacre and the delayed police response. One that investigators have attempted to answer through interviews with officers and reviews of video. Were the doors to the classroom locked, preventing police officers from entering in time to save others? I don't believe, based on the information that we have right now, that the door was ever secured, Mr. McCraw said of the classroom door that the gunman entered. The door was unsecured. This is the first time we're learning this. He said classroom doors in the school ordinarily would have been set with a key to lock automatically when closed. But the gunman had been able to enter the classroom, he noted, suggesting that either the door had not been set to lock or was not fully closed. A teacher made a request before the shooting that the lock be fixed, adding that the lock was not broken, but the so-called strike plate was dysfunctional, requiring someone to pull on it to get it closed. In any case, he said, there's no way to lock the door from the inside, and there's no way the subject to lock the door from the inside. Mr. McCraw focused his blame on the on-scene commander, whom he identified as the chief of Uvalde School District's police department, Pete Arredondo, who he said was the highest ranking person at the scene. The chief has said that he did not consider himself in charge, but Mr. McCraw disputed that. If you're going to issue commands, if you're going to direct action, he said, you're the on-scene commander. The delayed confrontation with the gunman, Mr. McCraw said, was an antithetical to everything we've learned over the past 2 decades since the Columbine massacre in 1999. So as you could see, this testimony is just horrendous. I mean, we're learning things now that just fly in the face of police procedure, fly in the face of everything we've learned, according to Chief McCraw, of everything we've learned since 1999. Of course, the most well-publicized school attack, Columbine. I'm going to show a little bit of the chief testifying at the hearing yesterday. I understand the hearing's still going on today, and we'll hear about what he has to say a little bit here.
Subject. The only thing stopping a hallway of dedicated officers from entering room 111 and 112 was the on-scene commander, who decided to place the lives of officers before the lives of children. The officers had weapons, the children had none. The officers had body armor, the children had none. The officers had training, the subject had none. 1 hour, 14 minutes, and 8 seconds. That's how long the children waited and the teachers waited in rooms 111 to be rescued. And while they waited, the on-scene commander waited for a radio and rifles. Then he waited for shields. Then he waited for SWAT. Lastly, he waited for a key that was never needed. The post-Columbine doctrine is clear and compelling and unambiguous. Stop the killing, stop the dying. You can't do the former unless you can't do the latter unless you do the former. Certainly, some things were done well, and even very well. The teachers quickly implemented active shooter protocols prior to the subject gaining entry. In fact, one teacher was able to call 911 and report that before the subject entered the campus. Law enforcement officers were able to evacuate hundreds of children in a safe and orderly manner. The district attorney, Christina Mitchell, and her staff led tireless efforts to take care of the victims and their families in the aftermath. And Senator Gutierrez talked a little about victim identification and victim notification. That is always a priority after such a tragedy. Very difficult to do, and she did an outstanding job in trying to handle that situation, blending all the different resources from local, state, and federal agencies at the time. Importantly, what I'd like to know that at the time of this death, or first of all, I'll go a little before I go to the timeline. I just want to cover one more thing, if you don't mind, is that with your permission, to quick.
So, folks, 2 of the things we're learning here is that the door that the teacher initially propped open, she, in fact, closed that door upon seeing what was going outside with the shooter, and she believed that she closed it enough that it would have locked. However, again, we believe something may have been wrong with the lock mechanism, and that door, in fact, never did lock. So, it's all of these things are going to be looked at in great depth, in great detail. But the one fact that is the most disturbing, and we actually see video of this, is that the door leading to the classroom, in fact, opens outward, and it was never locked. So no one ever tried that door to see if they could open the door and confront the shooter. That's one of the most disturbing things. As we said, everything we've learned since Columbine was to confront the active shooter, to confront him, stop the carnage, and clearly that was not done here.
Officers from entering room 111 and 112 was the on-scene commander, who decided to place the lives of officers before the lives of children.
That's the head of the Texas Department of Public Safety. Less than a month after the Uvalde shooting, he delivered the cold truth to lawmakers. Think about what you just heard for a second. An on-scene commander who placed the lives of officers before the lives of children. In other words, he stopped officers from running to the sound of gunfire. That commander is Pete Arredondo, chief of the Uvalde School District Police. Today, he dodged reporters, you can see him right there, and refused to testify publicly about his decisions during those 74 minutes that children died and bled to death. And he,
You know, folks, I'd just like to make a little observation here is that I suggested this very early on. We've been covering this case since the beginning. If I was an on-the-scene officer or even a sergeant on the scene, and I'm hearing shots fired and I'm hearing kids screaming, I'm not going to take the command that goes against my instincts and what clearly is correct. What I said, and I took a little heat for this, you're only required to obey lawful orders. And I would dispute that if someone told me not to go in there, when shots were being fired, when children were being killed, I would submit to you that is not a lawful order, and I would disobey that order, and I'd be well within my rights to do so.
Waited outside the door. Today confirmed the worst. Police in Uvalde waited for an hour and 15 minutes, 74 minutes before confronting a gunman that spent that hour and 15 minutes killing kids. The police had the guns, they had rifles, they had bulletproof shields, they had body armor. They had everything they needed to confront that gunman. They just didn't have the orders. And
see, folks, all of that is coming out right now. And early on in this investigation, we pulled up a clip from Bill Bratton. And Bill Bratton was clearly upset, clearly mad, clearly pissed off, and said this was a failure of command. And Ed Davis from Boston, another police commander, reiterated the same exact information that this was a failure, not of training, not of response, but a failure of command.
And the man giving the orders didn't have the courage. Virtually everything we were told in the initial days after the shooting turned out not to be true. Of course, the Border Patrol tactical team that eventually ignored the chief and went in are heroes. Here's one's ball cap. He was off duty, didn't even have time to put his helmet on. He ran in. In fact, when we were told on scene and then relayed to you for days that the classroom door was locked and that's what delayed police, well, that appears untrue as well.
There's compelling evidence that the law enforcement response to the attack at Robb Elementary was an abject failure and antithetical to everything we've learned over the last 2 decades since the Columbine massacre.
In other words, the billions we've spent on training police to respond to active shooters, well, you might as well have bought the police in Uvalde water guns, or at least the officers who were listening to Chief Arredondo. His crew of 19 officers were standing outside the door while those children bled to death inside. Daniel Linsky is here, former superintendent of the Boston Police Department, now managing director at Kroll and Associates. First to Kelly Meyer in Washington, where the Senate has now agreed, at least in principle, to do something after Uvalde, including about $20 billion of new spending. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, Leland. Well, that's right. The Senate just releasing this text for the bipartisan gun safety deal just reached here. Now, the bill falls short of what Democrats and President Biden wanted, but Democrats are praising this as the most significant piece of gun legislation in decades. Here's what's inside. Enhanced background checks for those under 21, funding for mental health and school safety, incentives for states to implement red flag laws that allows firearms to be removed if a person is deemed dangerous to themselves or others. And it limits the boyfriend loophole that keeps guns out of the hands of domestic abusers, unmarried or not. It was those last 2 items that were causing the delay in reaching the deal here on Capitol Hill, concern with conservatives that it infringed on Second Amendment rights. Now, here's what's not in it. Expanded background checks on all firearm sales in the country, a ban on assault weapons, and raising the age to buy those weapons. Now, top Senate Republican Mitch McConnell already signaling he would support the text of this bill, which is a big sign in getting other Republicans on board, which they will need in order to get this passed. And they were really pushing this to the limit here. They had to get this text out by tonight, by Tuesday night, in order to have any hope of passing it before they leave for their 2-week recess. They only have a couple more days here, though, on Capitol Hill to have a vote on this. And I wanted to add, because we are hearing from the NRA tonight announcing their opposition to this bill, saying, quote, it can be abused to restrict lawful gun purchases, infringe upon the rights of law-abiding Americans, and use federal dollars to fund gun control measures being adopted by state and local politicians. Leland?
And on the other side, I'm sure going to have Democrats who say it doesn't go far enough, therefore they won't support it as well. Kelly, thank you very much. A little bit of work for Congress to do before their vacation. We appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find new.
So, folks, you know, a lot of this, what's going to lead to, of course, is some new legislation. Will that make us safer? Will that prevent an active shooter, a gunman, from doing what this gunman did in this situation? I don't know. I don't think so. Well, I think we need to also to focus on what happened here, what occurred here, and you know, the whole mental health issue. And you know, one of the things that we definitely have to focus on is school safety. And had those two doors, the one door not failed, the gunman would have never been able to get into the school. And had the second door been locked, we also, all of this stuff is pertinent to what occurred. I'm seeing some of your questions there. Richard Resenda's unlocked door. Well, the unlocked door was the door that he was able to get in when the teacher opened the door and supposedly propped it open and then locked the door. The lock failed. And that's the door that the gunman was able to get inside the school and complete the carnage that that ensued that day. And of course, now, but we're focusing on, hello, Tom Cusinelli, Robert Clark, how are you? Was the failure of the police, the failure of the leadership. And that's what we're going to focus on, because that is something we can fix. And that is something that is inexcusable. And I want to play a little bit of this here.
The editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune, which has done a lot of investigating into this story. Sewell, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Your paper, the Texas Tribune, reviewed a timeline of events that was compiled by law enforcement. That included the surveillance footage that Sam just mentioned, transcripts of radio traffic, phone calls from the day of the shooting. What is it that you did find? What are your biggest takeaways from this?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. You know, the reporter just laid out a lot of them, right? The timeline, the video cameras, footage, the body cam imagery, and other documents we've reviewed basically suggest that from really minutes after, you know, the gunman arrived, you saw the arrival of law enforcement, weaponry, protective equipment, including those ballistic shields, even firefighting equipment, such as the Halligan, a tool that would have allowed firefighters and others to just force their way through the doors. So you really have this accumulation of men, materiel, and of course, motivation. What you did not have was a clear order and command to breach. And that is, of course, the delay that everyone is focusing on right now.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. I mean, we know several law enforcement agencies were on the scene. The school district police chief, Pete Arredondo, said he did not consider himself the officer in charge at the scene, but it seems like other officers did think he was the one in charge. What more can you tell us about that disconnect there?
Yeah, I think that's one of two primary disconnects. The first one is just that, right? That you have the head of a not only small town, but a small town school district police chief. This is normally a school police unit of 6 people. And so suddenly he's leading, or supposed to be leading, you know, a group of law enforcement personnel who ultimately number 60 to 80 people.
You know, folks, one of the things I just want to bring up, someone's asking, Richard Resendez, the classroom door was unlocked. No one ever tried it. No one, they were looking for the keys to a door that didn't need keys. The door was unlocked. No one ever tried it. They could have opened the door and stopped the threat. No one checked the door. Horrendous. We're learning this now, okay? And that's why, you know, as we said from minute one, day one, investigation takes time. And now the truth is starting to slowly seep out. And as the truth comes out, it's more and more and more disturbing. I want to focus a little bit on the on-scene commander, this Pete Arredondo, I said initially, and I've said that since we've been covering this case, in the NYPD, in a major incident, the highest ranking officer from patrol services is in command. However, when I spoke about this with Nassau County Police Commissioner Patrick Ryder, he correctly informed me, said, Bill, the highest ranking person on the scene could be a police officer. The 3 officers that arrived, they were the highest ranking guys on the scene for several minutes. They could have made the decision by themselves. They didn't have to wait for a commander. They could have made the decision by themselves to go in, and it turned out the door was not locked. That's the most disturbing thing that we are learning right now, that the door to the classroom was not locked. Digest that, folks. Digest that, people that are in the chat, people that are listening. The door to the classroom was not locked. So this gunman kept killing children as law enforcement falsely believed that the door to the classroom was locked. But why didn't they try it? Why didn't they try the door?
From more than a half dozen agencies. And so, if he wasn't the commander, who was? And we've talked to a lot of police experts about how the incident commander, should be the person best and equipped to kind of coordinate, right, across the different agencies. And of course, as you know, police and military are taught to obey orders and obey chain of command. And so no one was going to either, I don't want to say mutiny, but no one was going to defy the lawful orders and suddenly, kind of go solo. The second major discrepancy, Joe, is that Chief Arredondo had told us that officers had tried the 2 doors of those classrooms and then finding them locked, had to wait an excruciatingly long time for a master key to arrive to allow them to get in. Now state officials say that they strongly don't believe that the doors were ever locked.
Tom Cusinelli from the chat, great question. Did he have any police experience? Was he a political appointee? Did he ever have any supervisory experience? You're referring to Chief Arredondo. I don't know his police background, but being in charge of a 6-person department doesn't give me a lot of confidence. However, Tom, I just want to remind you, and what I was reminded of too, is that, look, if I was on the scene and I had 6 or 8 or 10 NYPD cops, and I was the sergeant on the scene and I said, don't go in, and they heard shots, I tell you right now, New York City cops would disobey my order right on the scene, right on the fly. And that's what makes them such good cops and such brave cops. They would have disregarded my order if it went against what they knew was lawful to do. But Tom Cusinelli, great questions. I don't know the answer about his police experience. He seems that he may be somewhat political since he was going on the city council. So he may be a political appointee more than a real street cop, which is what you need in an instance like this. You needed a street cop with a lot of experience on the scene.
It's unreal. As Sam just laid out, too, this whole shooting lasted 1 hour, 14 minutes, 8 seconds to be exact. During that time, officers, we know, were standing by outside the classrooms. We've seen some of the video that you got. Do we know what any of those officers were thinking, what was going through their minds during that excruciating wait?
It's very clear from the new footage that they were experiencing unimaginable agony and frustration. You had one police officer whose daughter was literally dying inside. You had another officer whose wife, a teacher, had called him from inside the classroom saying, I'm bleeding to death. And that, of course, is the teacher who subsequently died en route to the hospital.
Willez Pony, thank you so much for the $9.99 super chat. Your question, how could they be trying keys and saying they didn't work without trying the knob? Great question. And you know something? They cannot get away with that lie because we have video. So that potentially could have been a lie, something that they made up to keep the heat off them. But we know the truth now. Despicable, just horrendous.
So, and the officer whose daughter died, it turns out, had to be kind of disarmed and escorted out because, of course, his grief and his anger and his desire to go in and act, were so, of course, profoundly and understandably acute.
Hard to imagine what was going through his mind. So many journalists, including your newspaper, have been relentlessly staying on this. What comes next in the investigation, and what are you looking to learn next?
Well, there's certainly a lot more hearings. One thing that's very intriguing is the city-state tension now. Uvalde's mayor yesterday said at a very emotional city council hearing, he said that Texas DPS is trying to scapegoat local authorities, selectively leaked information to the media, is basically trying to throw the city under the bus and isn't telling them anything. And he said that he feels it's very, very unfair. And we had not heard that explicitly from the city before. So there's clearly a dynamic right now where Texas Department of Public Safety, Texas Rangers here in Austin is really emphasizing local failures of police command and control. And you've got the local authorities saying, hold on, there may be more to this story.
And I just want to ask you, so much of what we're learning in this shooting, it's one of the most scrutinized, I think, responses we've seen to a mass shooting since Columbine, is coming through journalism, coming through papers like yours. Talk about the importance of that in all the information we're learning about this response.
I'm very proud of the exclusive information and stories that have been published in the Texas Tribune, other Texas newspapers, public media, and of course, national outlets. What I am dismayed by is that Texas has not been very forthcoming with public records. Uvalde has not allowed a lot of local reporters into public meetings. The San Antonio Express News has reported that reporters in Uvalde and elsewhere have been kind of harassed or by cops and by biker gangs, actually, saying, don't bother this community. So there's this spirit of like, there really isn't a lot of openness and transparency. And to be honest, we're hearing from Uvalde residents, they're thanking us because they're not getting answers. And so what they're finding out is through the media.
Reminder of the importance of local journalism. Sewell Chan, thank you so much.
Milwaukee civilian, inaction is bad enough, but being prevented from acting to have saved a loved one, what could be more horrifying? You know, Milwaukee civilian, there have been reports of cops stopping civilians that wanted to run into the school and save their children. Yes, I find that horrible too. But if that's in reference to the police officers, I think that the police officers could have acted. I kept saying that they could act without the command or even against the command, knowing that the command they were given was incorrect, knowing that the orders they were giving was not correct orders. And so, as I said, they could have went against the orders. And, when I first said that, when we first started covering this case, I received a lot of heat, but I didn't care because I knew I was right. And I said, Lieutenant Peter Pranzo was in the chat, and he had said something earlier on that makes a hell of a lot of sense, that 99% of the time, the first officers on the scene are police officers. They're there without a boss. So think of the power that they have. They have the power to make the decision to go in there. They didn't have to wait for instructions. They know what to do. However, it wasn't done. So I don't totally accept the fact that this was all Pete Arredondo's fault. Was it his fault? A large part of it, yes. However, there were several other police agencies on the scene. Were they really waiting for his orders? For him to say, oh, okay, it's clear, as they hear gunfire, kids calling 911, kids screaming? No one checked the door, the unlocked door to the classroom. We learn that now. No one checked that. How could that be? It's just unbelievable. No one checked the door. They're waiting for a tool to open the door. They didn't need the tool. The door was unlocked. They're waiting for SWAT. They had guys on the scene with ballistic shields. They had the firepower on the scene. So a lot of this stuff is blatant lies. And now that the truth is coming out, it's getting ugly. It's very, very ugly what has come out since this has become transparent.
That is go in, no matter what. You only need a couple officers to go in, but instead they fell back, translated this from an active shooter to a barricaded subject. Again, admitting there that it was not the right decision, it was the wrong decision, and there's no excuse for that. Let's go to our chief national correspondent, Matt Gutman. Matt, you were there during this presser. We saw you asking questions, but really questions just leading to more questions and not enough answers.
I think what we just heard Director McCraw say, Whit, is that this was a colossal failure, and it's gutting and it's emotional to talk about because that failure led to the death of children. There's no other way to sugarcoat this. That's what happened here. They had BORTAC teams, that's SWAT teams that are trained with ballistic shields at 12:15 p.m. They only decided to breach that door at 12:50 p.m. And as you noted, there were children. There were children making 911 calls at that time, saying we're alive, saying we need help. They heard the soft voice of children. He just shot again. They knew the children were alive, and yet they decided to wait for something. It's unclear what the trigger was that made them go in. But that waiting period, no doubt, cost the lives of children, and they're going to have to answer for this. The local police chief, who apparently was in charge of that decision, is going to have to answer for this for a very long time.
You know, Robert Clark, he makes a comment, Robert Clark in the chat. I'm sure most big city cops would have charged right in without thinking these small towns are different. Their biggest cases up till now were a runaway cow or maybe a kid doing a burnout. You know, Robert Clark, there's a lot of truth to what you say. New York City cops deal with these kind of jobs all the time, not this specific, but real heavy duty emergencies. So they don't wait for the boss to tell them what to do. They know what to do. You know, they know what to do on the scene, and they're going to take action. And in this instance, you cannot totally blame it on this guy, Pete Arredondo. Yes, there's plenty of blame to go for him, but he's not the sole person to blame. Pete Pranzo, Lieutenant Pete says apparently Chief Arredondo has now since lawyered up. He's going to be forced to testify at some point. He's going to be compelled by subpoena, and he's not going to be able to hide behind an attorney. So right now, he's probably being told by his attorney not to testify because of the huge civil suit that's going to be pending.
There's also some question about now the FBI, this becoming a federal investigation with the oversight. It is just gutting to know the number of failures. So they arrived and they were here. Officers were on site at 11:33. Or very shortly thereafter. They had plenty of time to gather and do something about this. Remember, the suspect was only neutralized at 12:50, 80 minutes later. 80 minutes he was inside that school grounds. So there was plenty of time to do something. 911 dispatchers told officers, or should have told officers on the scene, that there were children alive, but that wasn't done with. So many unanswered questions, and there are going to be very many angry parents in this community after they hear this.
And we know that there were children in there alive who survived, who were with him that entire time as the horror played out. I want to bring in our Chief Justice Correspondent, Pierre Thomas. And Pierre, I just want to note in the timeline here, because this is really important. Again, they got these calls from inside at 12:03. Somebody called saying that they were in room 112, and they were saying room 112 and 111 were adjoined rooms. So the suspect was able to go back and forth. And at that time, again, this was 30 minutes after he walked.
Folks, just so you know, at one point there was 19 cops outside that door. 19. None of them thought about trying the damn door that was unlocked. We're just finding out that door was unlocked now. No one thought about trying the door?
In the building, dispatchers were advised multiple people dead. They called back saying that 8 to 9 students were still alive in there. And yet, Pierre, that information didn't get to the commander on the ground.
This is perhaps the most devastating press conference that we've seen maybe ever. Law enforcement officials acknowledging that children were in the room at risk, some of them perhaps suffering, and 19, we're told, police officers in the hallway. 19. They broke the protocols, as the commander talked about, of engaging. You engage the suspect until he's neutralized. Period. Full stop. Did not happen. And this notion that the information from the dispatchers who were talking to children not being relayed to the commander on scene, this is one of, again, the most colossal, devastating failure in real time that we've seen perhaps ever.
And Pierre, and you've pointed this out before, two things can be true at the same time here. You can have brave officers who went in. We know that a couple of officers were shot, but you can also have mistakes and a failed response. And of course, there's still a lot of information that we still need to get here, but certainly your law enforcement sources have been telling you that it was looking like this, and now today we have that admission.
All week, sources had been suggesting that we were not getting the full story, that there was too much confusion. We were getting halting information that proved not to be true. But the bottom line all week has been there was a significant period of time, an hour, in which those children were in a building with a suspect who had engaged police, been shooting at people, shot hundreds of rounds, and the police did not try to take him out. there's just no way to get around that fact. And today we got what we all suspected was devastating mistakes made, cascading mistakes that led to those deaths.
And there you have it. He spelled out what they're
You know, unbelievable, this information that's coming out now that, you know, as we spoke about early on in this case, that investigation takes time. It always to get the truth. And now the truth is coming out. It's coming out weeks later, but it's coming out. And just despicable what we're learning. Just horrendous. For folks that just tuned in, one of the big things we're learning is that the outside door to the school was not left open. The teacher had in fact closed it. However, the lock did not engage. And this is verified by not only by an interview with that teacher, but by video showing that she had in fact did close that door. The other huge revelation is that the classroom door was never locked whatsoever. Mary Williamson, thank you so much for the $20 super chat. Very much appreciated. So they were hiding behind that they didn't go into this door, or the order was not given to go into that door because they were waiting for the keys to the door. Now we know that that's nonsensical. That never happened. They didn't need the keys. The door was unlocked. So just, I mean, when you think about if you were a parent of one of these children and this information just came out that the door was unlocked and no one ever tried it, despite the fact that there was 19 officers outside that door, how does that make you feel? How does that make you feel about the competence, about the training, about many things in regards to this job? And as I said numerous times, there is a ton of blame to go around. And, you know, in law enforcement, we always like to establish blame. Whose fault was it? You know, whose fault was it? That's day one. Richard Resendez, no, nobody checked the door to see if the door was unlocked. So we know that, in fact, a lot of this was a lie because they said they were waiting to get the keys. They didn't need the keys. The door wasn't locked. Just incredible.
Texas lawmakers are trying to figure out exactly what happened when a gunman entered a Texas elementary school last month, killing 19 children and 2 teachers. The Texas House and Senate holding separate hearings today, interviewing law enforcement who were on scene that day. Now, one person many want to hear from is Uvalde School District Police Chief Pete Arredondo, but his testimony is private. NewsNation's Kelly Beeson is here, and Kelly, Arredondo was incident commander that day. Now, he's been avoiding public appearances, so why can't the public hear what he has to say?
Well, Nicole, we're told that's because he will be testifying at the House hearing that is closed to the media and the public. However, today, that did not stop the director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, Colonel Steve McCraw, from sharing harsh words about Arredondo's performance during the school shooting. For more than 5 hours today, missteps that were highlighted included 3 key elements, including that Arredondo did not have a radio with him, that police and sheriff's radios did not work within the school, and that some diagrams of the school that police were using to coordinate their response were wrong. McCraw calling the overall police response to the Uvalde school shooting an abject failure, stating that police officers armed with rifles stood and waited in a school hallway for more than an hour while the gunman carried out the massacre.
3 minutes after the subject entered the West Building, there was a sufficient number of armed officers wearing body armor to isolate, distract, and neutralize the subject. The only thing stopping a hallway of dedicated officers from entering room 111 and 112 was the on-scene commander, who decided to place the lives of officers before the lives of children.
You know, I would argue that he said the only thing that prevented officers from going in was the on-scene commander. I would argue that, as I do. The officers could have disobeyed his order because it was not a lawful order. I've said that numerous times. There's a lot of NYPD, Tom Cusinelli. I think you agree with me. There's some officers in the chat. You know that when you've probably been to jobs where the on-scene commander or the sergeant or lieutenant gave an order that was not a lawful order. You do not have to obey it. You may get some shit for it later on, but guess what? When push comes to shove, you're going to be right and he's going to be wrong.
Now, Arredondo has said he did not consider himself the person in charge and assumed someone else had taken control of the law enforcement response. He has declined to make further comments to the media. This, as a law enforcement response, has become the focus of federal, state, and local investigations. Nicole.
Yeah, still so many unanswered questions here, Kelly. All right, thank you.
You know, right, even up to this day, it seems like they're making excuses. The excuses are not going to fly in the face of all the evidence that they have now. You know, there's video evidence, there's testimonial evidence, there's telephone evidence, there's recordings, there's radio evidence, there's evidence of those on the scene. He cannot keep lying about this. Not having a radio, once you knew where the gunman was, what does that mean? You know where he is. Yes, it would have been better to have a radio so that the dispatcher could communicate with you 100%, but everyone has a phone too. You know, you could have communicated by phone. Look, I've tried during this whole investigation to try to find out what was going on and what went wrong and what could they have done better? And they did, as I said, this was an abject failure. It certainly was. You know, it certainly was an abject failure. And, you know, I'm having a hard time now learning the new stuff. Patricia Baylor, friend who is retired, local police officer, said his department actually trained in the local schools. This way they knew the layout and were familiar with the schools. You know, guys, we had on Patrick Ryder, the police commissioner of Nassau County, on a show a couple of weeks ago. Brilliant guy. He was former NYPD. Then he went through the ranks and became the police commissioner of Nassau County. He has some amazing ideas and amazing training and amazing things that he does in regards to active shooters in Nassau County. Maybe something that should be adopted on a national level. And that's what we need to do in these instances. We don't need these weasel politicians making new laws. We need them to listen to law enforcement, which they never do because they're so smart, politicians. We need them to listen to law enforcement and take the suggestions of law enforcement. What should be done? How do we stop this? What are the best practices? Politicians don't care about that. Doesn't get them votes.
Former superintendent of the Boston Police Department. Do we need more money or do we just need police officers who follow their training?
Both. And we need to train police officers for the way they're going to have to respond and to respond the way they train. I was just on a conversation earlier this week with some former members of elite SEAL teams and Delta Force who have a nonprofit organization that are looking to raise funds to train police officers for that critical moment. It is gut-wrenching to see the photographs of officers with shields and rifles standing by. I don't know why they didn't go in, but I suspect they were never trained. If you haven't trained for that moment when you're in stress,
do respect, sir. They were trained. There were pictures all over Facebook of them going through active shooter training. You can't train every cop the way you do SEAL Team 6.
You can't train every cop the way you train SEAL Team 6, but you can train every cop for that amygdala hijack, where you're sitting in a stressful situation and you freeze. Every human being is going to freeze every time. The difference between officers who are effective in responding to assaults like this and military members who are effective in responding to assaults like this are those who train to get out of that hijack as quickly as possible and to not stand there when they realize their training should do something different. You got to take those deep cleansing breaths and go into action. And we spend millions of dollars on our military personnel to train them to the challenges they face. And unfortunately, sometimes police officers don't receive the same type of training. I think police officers in average train probably 40 hours a week, if they get it, for their entire year.
You know, folks, this chief is great, and this is exactly what we need. And I've spoken about this before on this show, is that politicians, again, I'm going to point to these evil little politicians. Whenever the police do something wrong, they say they need more training. They need more. But you know something? They don't mean that, because training costs lots of money, and every cop wants training. They would love more training. So give them the training, spend the money. But what do politicians do? They defund the police. the first thing that comes out of those defund funds is training. So when you hear politicians say we need more training, just take it from me. You know they're full of shit.
Military personnel put in similar situations, train 3 months for a 1 month deployment. We need to train officers for that moment. I have had the privilege of working with men and women who ran towards gunfire and bombs being thrown at them because we trained them for that with real life scenarios, with role plays with missing arms and legs. So the first time they saw a human being missing an arm and leg wasn't on Boylston Street. They, in fact, then went to the training and grabbed tourniquets.
Evidently, at least as far as we know, they never even got into seeing the children because they stood behind the door for 74 minutes waiting for this order.
You know, I appreciate what these broadcasters are talking about, what they're reporting, but I don't think they have a really true understanding of what it's like to be shot at, what it's like. And I'm not bringing forth any excuses for the police officers. You signed up for this. That's what you do. And in a situation, it's an active shooter, you get involved. You confront the active shooter. Rocky K9, thank you for the $10 super chat. Big problem of small town, incompetency in many aspects of their professional services. Yes, agreed. A lot of it has to do with inexperience also, Rocky. Thank you so much for your comment. And I just don't believe a lot of these broadcasters understand. And again, as I said, cops sign up for this and there's no excuse.
Parkland, 58 minutes for them to confront the shooter. Uvalde, an hour and 14 minutes, 8 seconds. Columbine, 47 minutes. It's been 20 years since we've known that you go in. Here is the head of the Texas Department of Public Safety talking about just that. Take a listen.
I don't care if you have flip-flops and wearing Bermuda shorts. It doesn't matter. You go in.
Is there a difference between freezing because you don't have the training and just, for lack of a better word, being a coward?
I don't think there's a difference. I think every human being has an emotional response, and I think you can train that emotional response out of people and get them to go forward. We've had numerous successful events where active shooter events were ended by police officers in minutes. So it works if people are trained, and we need to make sure we're doing that. We also don't want to militarize the police. We have to have all kinds of strategies and do, a balance of both. But we have to put officers in the situation where they're going to respond and make sure they're prepared for it. Why didn't any of those officers, when they realized, there were officers asking, why aren't we going in? If you're looking to the left and looking to the right, and those officers are in a frozen moment too, they haven't dumped that chemicals off their brain and gone forward. Am I going to question somebody who I think is legitimate and somebody as I see as a mentor and a role model? And it's a lack of leadership to do the proper training to get officers prepared for that critical moment.
You just feel that Police Officer Pete or Chief Pete horrifically dropped the ball through this. Conceivably, the people you spend the most money training are the school police departments. The Uvalde School Police Department had gone through the training. The kind of training you're talking about probably, and you see also was elected to the city council, the kind of training you're talking about, though, is not going to happen between now and September. So are parents to believe that they're going to send their kids to school come September? And it's a roll of the dice if there's a school shooter that the police officer who shows up is able to control his emotions or not?
Folks, one of the things I brought up, and Tom Cusinelli, great comment. We didn't wait on 9/11. One of my favorite posters from 9/11 was a poster showing people running from the building and showing NYPD running in. So amazing. And that's the kind of bravery that is just expected in New York City. Officers running into the buildings as, basically Armageddon hit. And, even my own police career, and working in anti-crime, I told this story a few weeks ago. This guy did a knife point robbery. This woman, he yoked her and ripped her to the ground to take her $5,000 fur coat. I came out of the unmarked car and ran toward the guy with my gun in my hand. And I said to the perp, after I had caught him and cuffed him and had secured him along with my partner, I said, "How did you know I was the police?" Because I was in plain clothes. And he said to me, one of the biggest compliments anyone could have given me in my police career, he said, because most people run away from a robbery. He goes, you were running toward the robbery. And I said, that's very flattering. Thank you. I'm going to keep that with me for the rest of my police career. But police do that every single day, all across this country, this great country. There's been people that have tried to demasculate the police. They've tried to take away the tools that they need to do their job. And those are politicians. I say that word with zero reverence. Politicians are the worst thing that ever happened for police. There's a concept known as police guardians or police warriors. And they've made a great effort in the last few years to just make the police guardians, basically what you would call someone that's almost like a scarecrow. Just be there, omnipresence, don't do your job. And police as warriors, they needed warriors this day. They needed warriors to respond to Uvalde, to this school. Apparently, there was not enough warriors to respond to this job. So are they guardians or are they warriors? Just think about that.
That's a question parents should be asking. What is the training? How intense is the training? It's one thing to say you do training and you check a box, but unless you're putting those officers in stressful situations and simulate real life reality, both to not take a shot. We've seen a number of instances in our country where the use of force was lawful, but ugly. If it could have been done a different way, it should have been done a different way, but it was lawfully done. However, everyone involved probably would have liked to have seen something happen differently. So we need to ask those questions about what is the training, what's the intensity of training, and what is the preparation for our schools, for our police officers, for our teachers, for administrators, and how do we keep kids safe? Because we have an obligation to keep our community safe.
And sadly, at least in this case, really failed them. You point out rightly, there's so many police officers who've acted heroically at different times. Daniel Linsky, appreciate the time. Thank you.
You know, folks, I see Lieutenant Pete in the chat. You know, there were heroes on this scene also. You know, just the officers that were in the vicinity of that door, it was done incorrectly. It was done incorrectly. You know, an abject failure is the language that's being used. And as a result, 19 children were killed and 2 adults. Just you know, totally outrageous that this should happen or this could happen, and it did happen, you know. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. If you like this podcast, which I don't know why you wouldn't, please go on our YouTube, hit the subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, ring that bell. If you want to help us out, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels. If you want to become part of the Police Off the Cuff Real Crime YouTube family, we have 3 different levels, 5 different levels, and you could join those levels by supporting us. And it's a great family. We have a lot of people, over 100 people that are part of our YouTube family. We're always trying to grow it every day, and it's an exciting podcast. We cover all kinds of stuff, folks. Joe Murray is an excellent attorney at law. He's a retired NYPD member of the service, a police officer. He's a defense attorney now, what better way to be a good defense attorney than having been on the other side of the law, meaning a police officer. Now he's representing people that have been accused of a crime. Joe Murray, you can reach him by email at joe@jmurray-law.com. His website is jmurray-law.com. His cell phone number is 718-514-3855. That's Joe Murray, an outstanding attorney and a good guy, a friend of the show. I believe he's actually going to come on as a guest on Mark DeMayo's show this Thursday night. I'm just reading some of your comments now. Richard Bowles, always interesting watching what's happening in the USA. Crazy that gun laws you've got over there. Well, Richard, you know, many people don't understand our gun laws in this country, and it's in the Constitution that United States citizens have the right to keep and bear arms. And that was written in the Constitution basically to protect against government tyranny, more so than to defend ourselves, but to defend against government tyranny. So that's something that we hope will always be there. Because when government chooses not to defend their people, which they've demonstrated numerous times in the past couple of years, and the riots that stretched for 2 years, they would not allow the police to do their job to protect the citizenry. So then I believe, in my opinion, the citizenry needs the means to protect themselves. And that's part of what the Second Amendment is. They have the right to keep and bear arms, to be able to protect yourself and your family. And I would never, ever want to give up those rights. And, these politicians, a lot of them on the left, a lot of these Democrats want to just eviscerate the Second Amendment. And that's never going to happen. They talk about gun confiscation. That will never, ever happen in this country. So that's one of the reasons that the Second Amendment is so important. Let me play a little more of this.
In rooms 111 to be rescued. And while they waited, the on-scene commander waited for a radio and rifles. Then he waited for shields.
This is despicable. Why would an on-scene commander wait for a radio, wait for equipment, wait for a shield, wait for SWAT? There is no waiting while children are being killed.
And he waited for SWAT. Lastly, he waited for a key that was never needed.
It turns out they never needed a key to get in. Just another in a list of incorrect or false information fed in the aftermath of the shooting. By the way, as was the initial suggestion that a teacher had left open the door, in fact, the door to the school was closed.
You cannot lock this door from the inside of the classroom. There's nothing the teacher could do to lock the door inside the classroom. The teacher can't.
Unbelievable. You see that door? Basically, there's glass in the middle and there's a handle and it opens outwardly. No one tried that damn door. No one tried it. It's almost baffling to believe.
And come outside the classroom as the requirement is to lock the door with a key, only with a key. And this right here, by turning it, and the lock position. There's no way to lock the door from the inside. And there's no way for the subject to lock the door from the inside. I don't believe, based on the information we have right now, that door was ever secured. In fact, I have great reason to believe it wasn't secured.
Now we know. But the more important question, of course, is why didn't the police go in faster?
The doctrine for active shooters is clear. I mentioned before. And it's two sets of it. Hey, you stop the killing, you stop the dying. The other part of that doctrine is you isolate, you distract, and you neutralize. Everyone's taught this. You require it in TCOL training. We practice it, we preached it. This is the doctrine, and it recognizes that you run to the sound of gunfire. When you get to gunfire, you don't stop. Okay, when you get there, you run into gunfire, okay, and it's so important to do so. And I'll tell you what, and I've said it before, and I hope I underscore them. There's no doubt in my mind that those officers would have gone, any one of them would sacrifice their life for those children. Any one of them. If they knew there was kids in that room and teachers in that room, I have great confidence in officers. Those police officers, those local officers would have done what was right.
I think he's right. It's hard to blame the individual officers who are following orders.
Chief Aranda was right. I mean, officers are likely to get hurt and some may die, but it's less likely that they would than children without the armor, without the weapons, without the training, left alone with someone that had already brutally killed, at least at that time. We don't know the timing of it, but ultimately killed, 21 people.
And then Director McCraw mentioned something that I have been discussing at length on this show, the clear warning signs. If only someone had reported this shooter earlier.
He communicated extensively on several different social media platforms, including gaming platforms with individuals. And what's disturbing about some of the communications is that over the timeline, and you look at them, it's almost as if he's communicating with people that's...
Folks, one of the things we repeat ad nauseum on this show is that if you see something, say something. Someone earlier on in the chat said, There's a young guy in my neighborhood who's very strange and he seems to fit the profile of an active shooter. What can I do? And I said, well, go to your local police department, ask to speak to the detectives, and report this kid. They can do an investigation based on your report. I wouldn't go to the school. I'd go to the police. Go to the detectives. And they should investigate this. And that's what you can do. Again, that old adage, if you see something, say something.
If not supportive of the school shooter community, if there's such a thing, but certainly empathetic and sympathetic, as if they support. Look, it's a good thing. You get notoriety, you get points for being a school shooter, and it's obviously disturbing.
These people need to be stopped in their tracks. Support, points for being a school shooter. It's hard to believe.
But we have yet to identify even one report to the school or to law enforcement that discussed animal cruelty, that discussed many things are described, a morose, suicidal, fatalistic loner who had sympathies with and been called a school shooter. He certainly took on the persona of a school shooter in dress and demeanor and over the last year. And people noted this, but yet it didn't get reported.
Doreen McCormick, she writes in the chat, you took the job knowing the possibility of dying in the line of duty. This shows you either have the heart of a true cop or you're just a coward. Yeah, I think I have to somewhat agree with you, Doreen. I would assume you're NYPD. Thank you for your service.
We all need to speak up. And many more are now. We've seen numerous departments arrest individuals making threats. We've covered it on this show. Then McCraw focused on accountability and what we can do now.
Well, obviously not enough training was done in this situation, plain and simple, because a bad decision, a terrible decision. Terrible decisions were made by the on-scene commander and should have never happened, plain and simple.
What recommendation would you make to this committee to include in our report from the perspective of the head of the Department of Public Safety? If we were to ask you to name one recommendation that we would adopt, what would that recommendation be?
Well, we need to train more. Mistakes were made. It should have never happened.
I love it. Training, 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 training. You hear that word all the time, and you hear it coming out of this chief there. We know that's the truth. He's telling you we need training. So what does that mean? That means we need money for training. We don't want to defund the police like many of you politicians do. We need money for training. You want good outcomes or bad outcomes? Money for training. Training costs lots of money. Not only the training in itself, but it takes police officers off the road, puts them in a classroom for a week, 2 weeks. You know, I would say even on the NYPD, which I was on for almost 27 years, we didn't get enough training. I felt we needed more training, and specifically in firearms training, which is probably the NYPD probably is the best firearms training probably in the world. However, we only go twice a year. We should be going much more often, but guess what? You can't put 35,000 people to a range more than twice a year. The logistics of it, maybe they need more satellite ranges. What does that mean? We need more money. So don't be defunding like they did in NYPD for 1 year. They defunded $1 billion. More money, training, training, training. That's what you hear all the time.
That way, and we can't allow that ever to happen in our profession. This set our profession back a decade, is what it did.
It's true. It's the last thing the police community needed. But we need the truth to try to make sure it does not happen again. Following McCraw's testimony, Uvalde Mayor Don McLaughlin issued a statement that read in part, there's no cover-up. Anyone who suggests the city of Uvalde is withholding information without legitimate and legal reasons is wrong and is spreading misinformation. There are specific legal reasons the city cannot release information at this time. We need accountability. But let me make something clear. This incident, what we just heard, also does not detract from the excellent police work happening in so many other departments across the country, which we will continue to highlight on this program as well. Thank you for watching.
So, folks, we learned a lot of things today, a lot of things that are very ugly with this case. I said from day one, investigation takes time. And the investigation now is coming out. The truth is coming out. The truth is ugly in this case, and it's hopefully we can learn some things from this case, learn some best practices. We thought we knew the best practices when we talk about stopping the threat, stopping the active shooter in his tracks, confronting the active shooter. None of those things were done in this case. And as a result, 21 people dead. Just unbelievable. 21 people dead. This will go down as one of the worst. There you have it on the screen. Robb Elementary School. Bienvenidos. I mean, a huge Hispanic population. Great people. The faculty, the students. Seemed like almost everyone in that community was Hispanic. The police that responded were Hispanic. Again, the Chief McCraw, I think he's a pretty strong figure. I think he's trying to get the truth out there. It's taken a while. However, I don't think you can not point at his department too. There's enough, police departments. We love blame. We love to blame things. We love to put blame, to put accountability. Let's use that word. And there's going to be accountability in this case. Look, when you see stuff like this, all those little flowers and little candles out there representing each person that was killed in this incident, the devastation to this community, which is just too hard to believe, too hard to believe, too hard to accept. We should never accept it, because accepting it means it's okay, and it's not okay. It's never okay. And we got to figure out a way to have this never ever happen again, and folks, it's Patty L, some humbling and accountability needs to happen with all of the humans. Schmitty, yes, it was heart-wrenching. Guys, there's been a lot of coverage on this, and it's going to continue to be. I think we need to keep following this and keep learning from this. And look, even big departments, every department makes mistakes, but when they're tragic in this way, and it was a mistake of command rather than intention, it's just so heartbreaking, and you can't really explain it away. It's just horrendous. Schmitty, yes, but aren't there different detectives in police departments? I mean, I'm sure just walking in and saying I need detective will be better. No. I think you're referring to go report something to a detective. You can go into a police department and if they screen you downstairs with a police officer, you tell the police officer, this is what I want to report. And if they take the police officer's name, his shield number. They can't turn you away. There's accountability for that, Willis Pony, this would never happen with the NYPD. So mind-blowing. Guys, it's just crazy. It's crazy. I mean, we can't, as the truth is starting to come out, it's just hard to understand. It's very hard to understand. And well, folks, this has been, I hope you enjoyed today's show. This has been Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. And of course, I'm your host, Bill Cannon. I hope you enjoyed the show. I want you guys to have a great day. Be safe, and I'll see you. I'll see you very soon. I'll see you the next time, that's for sure. I'll see you very soon. Have a safe day, and God bless.
One episode just ain't enough.